Okay, so a fair bit has happened in the last week since the last podcast. Obviously, we've had the Europa League and Champions League finals. A lot of headed goals in those two finals. So heading is a key skill, and obviously we've heard that over the last couple of years that they're looking at raising the age at youth level when you can start heading the ball. So that's an interesting topic. But both finals, I felt, were organised very, very well. Some great goals scored, and were much better than last year's European finals. Absolutely, I think they were great finals to watch. On a rugby league front, and I'm going to start on this really, is the Brisbane Broncos situation with Anthony Seibold as head coach. Will he be there after today? That's going to be an interesting question. And the Pangai situation, whereby it's now been revealed that there's undeclared third-party payments which go contrary to the league's rules, which could then throw Brisbane into a lot more trouble than they're already in. Anthony Seibold's obviously taken 2 weeks out from the team to address a family issue in Sydney. He signed a 5-year deal with an option of a 6th year. He's 2 years into that deal. And it doesn't look like he's going to coach Broncos anymore. It looks like they're going to come to some kind of arrangement where they pay him out and he walks away from Suncorp Stadium and doesn't coach again for the rest of this season. The Broncos are in trouble. It's a situation that they've got themselves in over the last several seasons. This goes back to the Wayne Bennett era. This is not just on Anthony Seibold. This is a long-term issue that the club is facing. Has to do with player development, signings, contracts, salary cap, list management, and it's come to a head with Anthony Seibold as the head coach. Obviously, results this season have only won 3 games. The return to action post the lockdown with the new rules, Brisbane have struggled. They've only got the 1 win. And obviously, Brisbane being the wealthiest club in global rugby league, they are worth over 52 million Australian dollars. It's a mess. But what we've obviously seen this season is multiple players breaching the lockdown bubble that was put in place so games could restart, so the league could restart. And the NRL have come to agreements with state governments, Queensland, New South Wales, and obviously the capital territory of Canberra, to get the season restarted and to allow obviously games to take place. And obviously the Brisbane players, 10 of them, obviously breached those protocols earlier this month. And the Pangai situation, to beat a Pangai Junior, if you follow the rugby league, if you follow the NRL, the situation is he obviously was unhappy with the situation at Brisbane at the time. He committed multiple breaches of the protocols put in place that the NRL have agreed with the various state and territory governments in Australia to allow games to continue and the season to be played. He was hit with a breach notice, so that allows Brisbane to therefore cancel his contract. He's been suspended indefinitely by the NRL, and it has since transpired over the last couple of days that there were secret third-party payments that weren't declared to the NRL Integrity Unit, because obviously players do get sponsorships, and sponsorship is a key part of the game. And if you declare them, obviously that is open public domain. He says he's owed money by these third-party payments. But it appears that whoever organised these sponsorship deals for him, so he's a front of a product, didn't declare it with the league office. And that then becomes a very murky situation with salary cap breaches and such. What a mess. Brisbane are in the same situation that other teams that have been very successful over a long period of time, when they have to rebuild, it can get messy. They could have points deducted for any third-party payment breaches. They will face a hefty fine if found guilty, and they could be without a coach within the next 24 to 48 hours because the players come back to training Wednesday. So obviously now it's early hours Tuesday morning in Australia. The players will be back at training Wednesday. Clearly, the whole situation is a mess. But this is a long-term issue with Brisbane. You couldn't make this up. 5 years ago, they make a grand final. In the last 5 years, the team has declined. There's issues away from the fit with front office, player recruitment, a whole range of administration issues, and that then ends up with the team underperforming. I don't know where you go from here with Brisbane, so I can take questions on the NRL later on. On the football front, obviously, Sevilla have a record 6 Europa League titles. That is an insane success rate in the competition for a club of Sevilla's size. They're not the most successful team in Spain, obviously, by a long shot. They've only won 1 La Liga title in their history, and that was back in the 40s. So what they're doing in Europe, they are a cup team. They came from behind to do it as well. And it was a very entertaining game, the Europa League final. Far more entertaining than the Champions League final. It was a far higher quality game, in my opinion. The Champions League final, Bayern Munich, they did what they had to do to win that game. They frustrated Neymar. They isolated Mbappe. They won the midfield battle. They won the possession battle. And they took their golden opportunity to score and win the game. It was a 1-0. Possibly that they should have had more goals. The game was very cagey, but PSG were out of their depth and outclassed, plain and simple. It was a team of individuals versus a team unit that functions very well and is a very successful team for a reason. On other issues that are coming up, we know that the Football League seasons across Europe will restart on the 12th of September. We know that the Scottish government have said fans are allowed back into Scottish football stadiums and rugby stadiums and ice hockey arenas from a provisional date of the 14th of September. It's going to be interesting to see if that provisional date gets moved, considering that there is a rise in infection rate with this virus. And it's going to be interesting to see when it comes to the UK government if the 1st of October is attainable to get fans back into stadiums and arenas. They're going to do some trial events to see if it is feasible. We know the German government are trialing some scientific studies to see how quickly the virus can spread in an enclosed space with music venues. So it's going to be interesting the next month and a half, 2 months, to see what actually happens if and when fans are allowed back into sporting arenas and stadiums. Rugby union's a bit of an interesting case because they've only just restarted their season. And of course, there's the debate about Saracens and what to do with Saracens, and the fact they are getting relegated and they're not playing for any points basically, and how that all works with players being retained at Saracens, and we have to look at the rugby union salary cap, which is a debating point. But I've obviously been following the NRL pretty religiously since the restart. I've watched every game since the restart. And they have brought in some rule changes. I think that's something that's going to happen with a lot of sports. There's going to be some rule changes that are permanent. There are some that are going to be temporary. But looking at how the NRL and the AFL restarted and then the agreements they had to make with state and regional governments to get it done, we are already seeing fans back in stadiums in Australia and New Zealand. The Australian governments and the New Zealand government have dealt with the situation far better than the European governments have at regional and national level. We're already seeing 25% capacity of stadiums in certain locations. And we'll go from there. On the ice hockey front, the Bracknell Bees, obviously now they're just the Bees and they're playing out of Slough. It's going to be interesting to see when the hockey season, the ice hockey season, that is in the UK, restarts. Obviously, the sport in the UK is heavily reliant on fans turning up in attendance. And without fans, the sport is going to suffer financially massively. We know that UK sport has released funds to the various levels of hockey, depending on the financial budgets that teams are on to mitigate and assist. It's going to be interesting. I think we know that the John Mike Centre is closed. Whether it ever reopens and gets refurbed, who knows what's going to happen in the next 12 months, let alone 5-10 years down the line. We know it needs about £9 million worth of investment. The John Knight Group don't want to do it. Planet Ice at one point, about a decade ago, were interested in buying the site. But the same applies for Basingstoke. The same applies for a few other rinks as well that are in desperate need of refurbishment, repair, and love. The sport itself operates from very fine margins financially. The TV deal for the Elite League isn't great. It's better than no TV deal, and they are doing slow steps. But with this lockdown, the sport is heavily reliant on fans being in attendance. I don't know what happens with British ice hockey. On a side note, talking about sport and fans being in attendance, the lower leagues in English and Scottish football are discussing salary caps and spending caps, and I think that needs to be across the border, across all European leagues. If look, the great Barcelona side are basically bankrupt. It says to me that the current football financial model is broken, and there's been discussions about the structuring of the TV deals, considering that Sky and BT demanded their money back. The fact that rugby league as a whole sport in the UK and France had to get government assistance to survive the lockdown, and how they're going to pay that money back to the UK government. I think the French government put some money in as well because French teams play in the Super League Championship structure. That's going to be really interesting to see what happens there. The situation though is interesting. The fact that football, the TV companies were demanding a rebate on some of their TV deals and saying this is not the deal we signed up for. We signed up for this package. They still got to show the games. The fact that when it came to rugby league, they said we're not going to ask for any money back. The fact that rugby union, massive salary cuts had to be across the board. And this is in the wake of the Saracens scandal that took place over Christmas and New Year. I mean, 8 months ago, Saracens were really being dragged over the coals, but we knew the Saracen situation several seasons ago. There were rumours circulating that there were secret third-party payments and there was dodgy goings-on as the Saracens to circumvent the salary cap that they actually agreed to every year from 1999. This wasn't just like they broke it overnight. This was systemic, planned, thought-out breaches of a system they sign up to every season. So Saracens deserve everything they get at them. And for those saying, oh, we feel sympathy with the players knew what they were doing. They were part of the leadership group of that club. And the whole debate about finance and sport, there's too much money in it. There is too much money in sport at the moment. Got to have a monster. And that's part of the problem. Barcelona, one of the biggest global brands in sport, is basically bankrupt. And that is a massive problem. Now, go back to the NRL, because I'm a massive fan of the NRL. The Peter V'landys, who is currently the Australian Rugby League chairman, who's also basically the de facto chairman of the NRL as well, even though there is a person in place with that role, he basically answers to Peter V'landys. He managed to negotiate a TV deal which is basically as good as the one they currently have. Players didn't have to take a salary cut this season, even though at the beginning of the lockdown, they were willing to give up 70% of their salaries. Now, bearing in mind, rugby league players don't get paid as much as you think. There are a couple of players on $1 million contracts, not many. And there's a misnomer because they're professional athletes and it's the second biggest sport in Australia. These guys are on mega money. And same with the AFL. They're not. The very few players are on the top money. Most players, yes, they're earning decent wage. They're earning more than the average wage for the average citizen in Australia and New Zealand. They're not earning mega dollars. The fact that every player pretty much was happy to have a 70% pay cut tells you the integrity of those players. The fact that Peter V'landys came in and thrashed out a deal so that the salary cap could remain the same, so the players could earn pretty much full salaries and not have to take any wage cuts, sorted out a TV deal and came up with an agreement with the state governments of Queensland and New South Wales and the territory government at Canberra to allow games to restart, shows the integrity and the drive behind him. Does the NRL have promotion relegation? No, it doesn't. It has a thing called reserve grade and the regional cup competitions in New South Wales and Queensland, and there's also other state competitions in Western Australia, Victoria, South Australia. There's the territory competition in Northern Territory. So there's regional competitions which are the lower grades. Then you have reserve grade, which is the grade below first grade. First grade is the top level. There is no promotion relegation, so you have 16 teams. in the NRL. And then you have teams in the levels below, all the way down to the juniors and the amateur game. Super League does have a relegation promotion system. It's just the difference in how the sport is governed and how the sport has evolved over the last 100 odd years. It's the principles that are in place. The European system normally has promotion relegation in most sports, whereas in Australia they don't. Partly because they don't have the player base or the club base and the finance to do so at the low levels. It's just not viable for a team to go promotion relegation because teams would go bankrupt like that, and teams wouldn't be able to financially compete if they were to get promoted. But on the side of Premiership Rugby and Super League and the ice hockey and all that, we've tried promotion relegation. It didn't work very well in British ice hockey. It was a disaster. We tried not having promotion relegation in the Super League for a couple of seasons. There are plans possibly to ring fence rugby union. That won't necessarily sit well, considering that Saracens have just been thrown out of the top division, and some of the best English players and in fact European players play for Saracens and have committed their futures to rebuilding with that club from the bottom up. When Juventus got thrown out of Serie A for the match fixing scandal in 2006, they were allowed to battle back from Serie B back in. Rangers up in Scotland, when they were liquidated and reformed as a going entity, had to go from the bottom league. Dunfermline the same, Livingston the same. So I think the issue is it's the finance, it's the TV deals, it's the financial structuring. We're seeing this issue now in League One and League Two in English football and the non-league as well. And back in April, they were proposing a salary cap system because the clubs have basically said, we're going to go bust without fans in attendance. We're going to go out of business. The TV deals weighted too heavily to the top, and that is a problem. Talking about sport needs to go back to paying sustainable wages. Yes, the wages have become overinflated. The transfer market has become overinflated. The fans, the fans, are the ones who are paying in the pocket, because we were told that when the Premier League was set up and when the Championship, obviously the league structure reformed and it got rebranded as League Two, League One, Championship, Premier League and all that, we were told that ticket prices would be sustainable. That has proven not to be the case, and player wages have also proven not to be sustainable. Across all four professional top four leagues in English football, they're not sustainable. Scottish football's going through the same thing. There's less money in Scottish football. The wages are not sustainable. The TV deal is heavily skewed the wrong way. It's not split like it used to be, which was 50, 25, and then the other 25 was split between the bottom two leagues. So it's 50% for the top league, 25% for the second tier, and then the other 25% was split reasonably evenly, I think 12.5% each, between the two bottom professional leagues. That's how the TV deal was set up pre-92. It then went horribly weighted to the top tier, and the TV deal the Championship has is creating division as well. The EFL have badly handled a lot of issues. You can look at Bury, Macclesfield, Bolton, Wigan, the fit and proper persons test. There's a whole there's too much money in the game. There's more money than there needs to be. It's not being distributed evenly. Some clubs have benefited massively from the way the money's set up. Other clubs not so much. And you look at the spend. There's a reason why financial fair play is a thing. And unfortunately, clubs are flouting it at will. Man City got their European ban overturned, just paid a small fine in real terms. AC Milan got their ban reduced. PSG got a fine in the end. That is a massive problem. The player wages massively inflated. And I always use the example of the year I was born, the 89-90 season. I was born in 1989, midway through the 89-90 season. The average salary for a player was, I think the average salary was about £64,000 per year. We're now seeing that as an average salary per week. So the salaries are 52 times greater on average for the top flight in 30 years. So in my lifetime, the salaries are 30 times greater. And that is clearly no way sustainable under any financial model. Doesn't matter how much money the game is bringing in, if you've got that kind of expenditure on average on your books in the top flight. When you have something like this, like a health pandemic, or any kind of issue where the league has to get shut down and you're not earning revenue, or you have stadium bans for fans, any problem, be it short or long term, we know that Manchester United are losing £5 million per day with no fans in attendance. It works out over a whole week, 5 million per day. You times that by 7, and then you times that by 52. That is how much money they would be losing over a year with no fans in attendance. And the earliest we can see fans being allowed back in is October as provisional date with a limited capacity. So still the lower leagues are going to get shafted. And we do know if the Huddersfield owner has come out and said 50 to 60 clubs will be basically going into administration within the next 12 months as things currently stand. And that's across the top 4 leagues. That's including the Premier League in there. That's 2/3 of the professional clubs above the non-league could go out of business or at least into administration. There is a massive problem that the FA, the EFL, and the Premier League are not addressing. And that is the complete overspend that clubs are doing. Firstly, to attract players to the club. Then they've got to pay them. And they've got to pay their bonuses. It gets messy. Plus, you've got the transfer market where a transfer, let's say Neymar's transfer, Barcelona and PSG are still sorting out payment plan 3 years after he was transferred to PSG. PSG are still paying installments on that transfer. That transfer wasn't paid out in one go. They're paying installments on a monthly or yearly basis, breaking it down into installment chunks. Same with Mbappe for his transfer. They are still paying installments on those transfers. This is what the transfer market is in utter chaos. And unfortunately, no one in FIFA or UEFA or whatever FA or however it works out in football governance seems to have a clue how to reorganise and re-govern this mess. It is a mess. And the problem is it's not going to go away. These clubs still are owed money. It's like interest payments on a mortgage. You don't pay your mortgage all in one lump sum. You can buy your house with cash straight up. Go, right, I've got the funds. I'm buying a £300,000 house like that. You can do that. You can buy outright, or you pay on finance. And basically, it's like paying finance on a motorcycle or a car. You have your contract period where you have to pay it off. And this is the problem. Barcelona are still owed money by PSG. Barcelona are in serious financial difficulty. They would happily take all that bang in one lump sum. So it does make you wonder how the transfer market is set up and how it all works. I think, that goes back also to the wages. The wages are massively overinflated, but so is the transfer market. And the transfer market and the wages is part of the problem. Because the top-end clubs have got so greedy with TV money, so greedy, the players and the agents especially have got greedy also. And this is a problem that transcends across all sports. Because you can have a player agent who works for a representation of an agency that deals with multiple sports and multiple sports stars. And they want to get a percentage of each contract signed, each transfer or trade, depending on whatever sport you're looking at. And they want to take their percentage for every deal negotiated with a sponsor, with a contract, with a contract extension. They want to get their money. And we've seen issues with rugby league. We've seen issues with other sports where agents have overinflated a player's contract so they can get their fee. So there needs to be better regulation when it comes to player agents. There's more transparency when it comes to player agents. That's my phone going off, which is really annoying. But no, there needs to be greater transparency. There needs to be a greater, regulation when it comes to player agents. And this debate is been ongoing for a while, and it's really reaching ahead when we look at this lockdown and we look at the lack of sport being played. It is a concern, a massive concern, and we've seen some sports not resume for this season. The CFL, in the Canadian Football League, not resuming. That is a league, again, heavily driven by gate revenues. The TV deal is not worth a lot of money. And if you look at that league, it's a 9-team league, which is a problem. It's an odd team league, which is bizarre. And if it was, let's say, 10 teams, half the teams do not make a profit. They're actually operating at an operating loss. So this is a league that is heavily dependent on getting fans in the stadium, bums on seats. They couldn't be guaranteed by the Canadian government that fans can be in attendance. There is no plans in Canada or the US to get fans in stadiums anytime soon. The NASCAR have tried it with limited attendance when it comes to motorsport. But when it comes to like American football, the NHL, Major League Soccer, Major League Baseball, Major League Rugby, which is a brand new league that's going to be financially hit. All these major sports leagues in the US and Canada, they cannot guarantee that fans will be allowed in to watch games. It's a mess. We've seen lots of issues in North America, and they couldn't guarantee that they could get fans in, heavily fan driven. Without fans in attendance, the whole league will lose money. The TV deal isn't great. And again, you come back to the debate about TV rights. Some leagues, some sports do not have great TV packages because they go for what sells. And it's a problem. And you look at it, and you look at Tottenham, for example. Their new stadium is designed with a contract in place with the NFL to play 2 games out of their 4-game London series at White Hart Lane. That's not going to take place this year, which means Tottenham are going to take an even bigger financial hit in trying to pay off that stadium. They're going to lose a lot of money. A lot of money is going to be lost by Tottenham Hotspur this season. And not just for playing football, but not being allowed to rent out their stadium to another sport. Big problems. That's one of the reasons why they built the stadium in the first place, was to host NFL games. And now they're not having that opportunity. It is bizarre. And yes, salary caps. I do think we're not far away from European football introducing salary caps. Other sports have it. I can't see European football continuing along the path it is without some kind of change to the financial fair play system and salary caps and transfer caps being brought in. I cannot see how the current system that we currently have in European football is sustainable. If clubs like Manchester United have willingly admitted openly they're losing £5 million per day without fans in attendance, that's just losses. That's not profits. We're talking about what they're losing, what's expenditure. So even with fans being allowed back in, it won't be full capacity at Old Trafford. They are still going to be losing money. They could be making money elsewhere, but that is a loss that they are making. That is an expenditure out of the club. The smaller clubs are going to be hammered, absolutely hammered, and the lower leagues are facing extinction. There is clearly problems. It doesn't matter if you have a system, a league system where there is no promotion relegation, like the NRL, like the NHL, or if you have a promotion relegation system like we do in European sport. That there is clearly an issue with unsustainable finances and unsustainable financial models. And whenever people suggest there needs to be some kind of level playing field for teams and financial responsibility, they get shot down. It's bizarre, especially when you look at clubs like Barcelona, one of the biggest brands in global sport, basically on its financial needs. And they're still not willing to institute salary caps. It's just, football is just, it's too much money in the sport. Too much money in the sport. Plus, I'm not sure if the players will be willing to actually take permanent pay cuts because they've actually signed contracts that have to be honoured legally, unless they're willing to re-sign contracts where they're on less money. At which point, sponsorships and third-party payments come into the equation where they can top up their salaries. And a lot of players already have these sponsorship arrangements where they do TV advertising campaigns and they're on posters to sell stuff. They give interviews and they endorse brands and they're spokesmen for things. A lot of sports stars do that. But that's going to have to become more commonplace if their actual base salary with their team drops. Unfortunately, a lot of companies are also financially on their knees. So I think at some point, players are going to have to bite the bullet and take less money. It's the only way that, as things currently stand, professional sport is going to survive long term. If they don't want to introduce any new salary caps or spending limits, they are going to have to seriously consider taking less money. And the way it's been going with the wage inflation and transfer market inflation when it comes to football, and you could look at rugby as well, the wages are slowly going up. Rugby league, the wages are going up. I'm not sure if the players will be willing to do that. You have to have negotiations in good faith. And what we have seen since March is when the PFA were advising their members, which is all the professional foot players in England, not to take salary cuts or wage deferrals. They were advising their members against it, and it actually came down to individual playing squads and clubs coming and having meetings and discussing the situation, that salary cuts or wage deferrals were put in place. The PFA was saying, don't take them, ignore them, refuse. So the players' union has a part to play in this. The league, the Football Association, UEFA, FIFA, whatever it may be, the governing bodies have a part to play in. The clubs have a part, and they're not negotiating in good faith. Yeah, but rugby union players are having to take salary cuts. We know that various unions have cut staff. We know the Welsh have cut staff. The Welsh union furloughed a lot of staff. The Scottish union furloughed a lot of staff. The RFU are having to look at spending cuts. They're losing money. Rugby union is in a precarious position. It really is. Same as rugby league, but rugby union across the board, across the world, is in a very precarious position financially. We'll look at Super Rugby; it is in a bit of a mess. Look at the Pro League; it's in a bit of a mess. English Premiership Rugby is in a bit of a mess. I think French Rugby has got the highest salaries, and they're not sustainable either. So you look at it, and rugby union has problems, and professionalism has got its own issues that date back to '95. The long-standing issues financially with rugby union have come to a head during the last 5-6 months. This has exacerbated and really highlighted the problems with the financial systems in rugby union. Can rugby union survive in its current form? Probably not. There's going to have to be some kind of changes, whether the players at the top level, and this is what Augustin Pichot was talking about when he stood for election in World Rugby's election against Bill Bowman, was the top level players have to be willing to have their salaries reduced, so the lower paid players in the professional and semi-pro game can earn a bit more, and the wealth be more distributed evenly across all the professional leagues. And he got voted down, and Bill Bowman got put in again. So it's more of the same, please. And I feel sorry for Pichot. I think he was thinking outside the box, and he did say rugby's finances, and this was leading into the COVID pandemic. This is before the shutdown. He was saying, I'm going to stand. We need to change how rugby is financially run. There is a problem with the top end talent, top paid talent, should I say, not the top end talent, because there's some very talented players who are playing well below their value or market value. The top paid talent need to take a small percentage cut, so the lesser paid can get that little bit extra. And we need to restructure how the finances of the sport work. And he lost the vote. He lost the vote. He was not elected, and Bill Bowman retained his position for 4 more years. So you're going to have 4 more years of the same. I think rugby union is playing catch up with other professional sports that have been professional for longer. Professionalism is only 25 years old. And unfortunately, the salary caps aren't universal around the world because you've got different currencies being used, different exchange rates, different TV deals for different leagues. And so this is why Australian rugby is in such a mess, because they cannot afford to pay the same salaries as the European leagues. Or in this case, and now Major League Rugby in North America, we are seeing Australian rugby unions in the right financial mess. Because it instead of developing youth talent and working with the amateur and the youth systems and the schools and the universities, they're losing talent to rugby league. They're losing talent to the AFL. They are losing players who will stay in the rugby union ranks to other countries. So the Australian system is a right shit show. But then you look at other sports at grassroots level, it's exactly the same. I don't think Australia is a sports mad country, and I'm a massive fan of the NRL, as you know. I also like the AFL as well, and they are pinching rugby union players and making them do a coach switch. And I always use Cooper Cronk as the prime example of a top class player who's won everything in the game. Angus Crichton of the Sydney Roosters, he's currently injured, but again, another rugby union player in his youth. He's a premiership winner. I believe he's played state of origin. I'm not 100% certain, but again, another young, talented player who was lost to rugby union because rugby league offered him more money in the lower grades. In reserve grade, he got more money. He went to the Rabbitohs. He's ended up going to the Roosters, crossing that divide, which is rarely done. And he can get more as a salary playing rugby league than rugby union. There's more money in rugby league in Australia. They have a better TV deal. They have better attendances. They have, more professional teams that play at the top level. I wouldn't say Australia have too many professional sports players. I think they're a sports mad country. It's part of their culture. Same in New Zealand. It is part of the fabric of Australian society. I've got friends who are from down under, and even if you're not a professional sportsman and you have a normal job, you will have some kind of link to a professional or amateur or semi-pro sports club as a member or as a fan. It's the same with Canadians with ice hockey. The majority of the population at some point have played that sport or watched that sport. 70% of Canadians, I believe, have had some kind of involvement with ice hockey at some point in their lives. Aussie rules is the main sport in Australia. Rugby league is second. But the reason why Aussie rules is the main sport is it's played in every state and territory, and it has professional teams in all but Tasmania and the Northern Territory that play at first grade. The reserve grade, there is reserve grade leagues and second and state and territory leagues across the board, and rugby league has that, but on a lesser scale. And once you get off the East Coast, it is Aussie rules first, rugby league second, and it's that kind of balancing act. The NRL needs to expand into Western Australia and South Australia in order to compete with Aussie rules, the AFL. But I think I don't say it has too many professional sports. It's just part of their culture. It's part of society out there. I think it's just part of. It is just part of the fabric of the country. For a country of population size, not actual size, population size, it does produce a hell of a lot of top quality athletes in a variety of sports, be it team or individuals. I mean, you can look at tennis, golf, boxing, mixed martial arts, swimming, cycling, motorsport. They are constantly producing top quality sports stars, and it's like a production line. There are issues within Australian sport, absolutely, but you look at how mad the country is for professional sport. There are issues with sports governance in Australia. There's no doubt on that. I mean, crikey, if I was to look at the issues within rugby league, within rugby union, I've done so multiple times within the AFL. There are issues with governance at the top level. There are flaws. There are problems. It's not a perfect system, but it's more part of the fabric of the society. The Australians are a very active sporting country. Same in New Zealand. New Zealand's population is about 5-6 million. Look how world class the All Blacks are. The women's rugby union, rugby league team's pretty class as well. Look at the amount of, outside of that, their cricket team is one of the best in the world. From a very small population base, they dominate in several sports. But again, it's part of their culture. It's part of their society. It's part of each community. They're sports mad. They put more emphasis on physical education, sport in schools. It's something that other countries could learn a lot from. Is how the Australians and the Kiwis do their sport. I mean, Papua New Guinea, they're rugby league mad. Everyone plays it, and they do have a professional team in the Queensland Cup competition, and their national side is not bad either. They have some pretty world class rugby league players, because again, they put a lot of emphasis on rugby league at school. They put a lot of emphasis on again being very physical. It's something about the Australasian countries where they put a lot of emphasis on these team sports, and people wonder why they keep producing these world-class rugby union, rugby league players. It's because it's part of the education system. It's almost compulsory, I believe, at school. And it's in the communities that people live in, there's always an amateur club. There's always an amateur club. There's always a semi-pro club in the state leagues nearby. You're never far away from some kind of sporting activity that normally Aussie rules or rugby league and cricket in Australia. Any town, any suburban community, there's always one of those clubs floating around, and they play at a pretty high standard. I do think we focus too much on association football, and the issue is when you get past that, rugby union, rugby league, there's a divide when it comes to state and private education, where rugby league is not played in enough schools, and rugby union is also not played in enough schools. And then you come to the amateur and the semi-pro game, and again, not every community has a rugby union club, not every community has a rugby league club, because there's a bit of a regional divide there, and that's part of the problem. Is grassroots. There's too much emphasis on football, and there's not enough emphasis on the cricket, because you have the county system, and below the county system, the top two tiers, you have the third tier county system, and below that, then you have the local cricket clubs, which again, the funding there is a mess, and not enough state schools play cricket. It's down to the grassroots clubs in the communities. But there's too much emphasis on football, and to be honest, I think the quality of that sport is declining, and has been for a while. And it's not just an English thing; I think it's across the board. But that's again a personal opinion, because there's too much money in the sport, and not enough money going to the grassroots levels that would benefit the wider game. On the Newcastle United takeover, we obviously know that the protracted takeover, which collapsed, took too long. Questions will be asked of the Premier League and the FA about why it collapsed, and why they drew out, this long drawn out process. Clearly, Mike Ashley now has no choice but to sell. You look at his retail businesses, and the retail sector in the UK has been hammered since, well, for the last decade or so. It's actually suffered a fair bit, but a lot of companies are going bust. And in order for Mike Ashley to shore up those companies, he's going to have to sell Newcastle United and pump that money into his retail businesses and his warehouse businesses. We know there are other bids on the table. At some point, there'll be another takeover attempt. It has to happen at some point. He can't hold on to the club indefinitely. The whole saga was a mess, personally, because Amanda Staveley had 3 separate attempts where she was part of a takeover bid to buy this club in 3 years. The club's been up for sale for 4 years, and it's been dragged on and on and on and dragged out and out and out, and it's done nothing to help the situation. Whatever you think of Steve Bruce as a manager, the same problems have faced by Rafa Benitez throughout the last 3-4 years was, what's my job security? Can I buy players in the transfer window? Can I strengthen the squad? All about the whole thing. How am I going to put a team together to compete on the field? And what is what is the future about my position? Because that then affects the players, that affects the backroom staff, the club staff themselves. Any uncertainty over a takeover, what about their jobs? What's going to happen if the new owners come in? Are they going to restructure the off-field stuff, like the club shop, the club head office, recruitment, all administration? There's a whole host of things that go on with the takeover deal. So that's clearly had a massive impact on the staff morale. We know about the furlough that took place with those non-playing club staff. That was just nasty, and the mess that is Newcastle United off the field is affecting performances on the field. It doesn't matter who's the manager in charge. It could have remained Benitez, Steve Bruce. It doesn't matter. The fact they're not getting the support needed from the owner and the off-field staff, the non-playing staff being affected as well, it's a whole mess that should never have been allowed to get to the stage. The fact that multiple bids have collapsed is not great. And, it's been 12 and 13 years of chronic poor ownership. And the FA and the Premier League have to take responsibility for some of this. And questions will be asked about a whole host of things to do with the failed takeover there, and it's a sorry state of affairs. Up with the tune. I think one of the most loyal fan bases you'll find anywhere in sport is the Newcastle faithful Toon Army. Probably one of the most faithful, passionate, fanatical fan bases in sport. They deserve better. Even if they're not winning the Premier League, they still deserve an owner who cares. They deserve investment in their training facilities. They deserve investment in the club infrastructure. It creates jobs in the northeast. Newcastle United is a big employer in the city. Um, they deserve much better than what they've had under Mike Ashley, and the previous ownership as well racked up huge debts. So they need an owner who's responsible and will invest. Plain and simple. Um, Maybe professional football has peaked. There was talk of having a football league Division 3 before COVID. Yes, there was talks of expanding professional football down to what is the National League, the former conference. Most of the clubs there, the majority of the clubs there are professional, and they've been hit really badly by the lockdown. There's talks of reconfiguring League One and League Two and the National League and making it North-South divisions. I think we have to make sure the clubs throughout, from the Premier League down, all survive into next season. We saw with Bury this time last year going out of business before lockdown, before the pandemic. It shows that football as a professional sport has been financially mismanaged and badly governed for a very long time when a club during a season goes out of business. Same with Gretna in Scotland about a decade, 12 years ago. It tells you that that is a sport that has been chronically mismanaged from the governing body downwards. And this is where I think football needs to have a look at itself. If clubs are going out of business in good times, imagine what will happen now that we're not sure when fans are going to be allowed back in and in what numbers. We're not sure, because these are provisional dates that the various regional and national governments are giving us about when fans can return. And the lower down the football pyramid you go, the more reliant you are on fans and attendance because the TV do. But with Bury going out of business, considering they were league champions the season before, the league below, tells you that something is seriously wrong with the checks and balances and the system that is in place, that the EFL, the FA, and the Premier League all agree upon, that the clubs sign up to every season going, yeah, we're happy with this system. Something's gone horribly wrong, massively wrong when a club goes out of business during a season. And the fact that Macclesfield and Bolton and Wigan, the Wigan situation is an absolute mess that should never have been allowed to happen. And that lies with the EFL and the Premier League because they were recently relegated from the Premier League. They get these parachute payments. Dave Whelan sells the club, which is fair enough. He doesn't want to keep funding it anymore. He's got to focus on his other businesses, which is totally fair, which also, by the way, have now actually gone out of business due to COVID. So Dave Whelan goes, I want to sell up. I've enjoyed running the club, owning the club. I'm selling up. The club gets sold for below market value, which then gets sold again and ends up with a 12-point deduction in administration. And questions are being asked about the whole situation because they failed in their appeal and they got relegated. Any of the NIHL teams fully professional? I don't think so. I think they're semi-pro with some professional players on the books, absolutely, but they're not classed as fully professional. They're classed as semi-professional because there's not enough professional players in the squad. That's how I do it. They were at one point, Telford were fully professional when it was the EPIHL. They were professional at one point, and then the financial crisis hit, and that affected certain teams. I know the Telford Tigers at their peak about 4 or 5 years ago were fully professional, but I think it's now a semi-professional structure to allow those smaller teams that were in the old national division system. When the EPIHL collapsed, I believe it's gone to semi-professional status, although there are players on two-way contracts, so they're classed as professionals on the development contracts, and there are one or two, the import players are classed as professional. There's one or two others who are classed as fully professional as well, earning a salary, but the teams are classed as semi-pro. I think that's my understanding of the situation. However, with what's happened, they have all received grant from UK Sport to make sure that they can be shielded financially during this lockdown because the seasons couldn't be completed. And obviously the seasons are going to start later as well without fans, most likely. And then the earliest fans are allowed back in, as we know, is the 1st of October, provisionally. And that could all change because we're seeing local lockdowns in locations. And it's, there could be for example, Swindon, for example. There could be a local lockdown brought in there. And that is an example I'm using because just down the M4 from where I live, obviously about 45 minutes from where I live, because I've moved. And there was a rise in cases in Swindon. So let's say we're allowed into the arena, but it's limited capacity. So there's limited tickets, but we're allowed in. And then a local lockdown's brought in. Can Swindon carry on playing? As an example I'm using, I could use Guildford in the Elite League because I could go see Guildford as well with my work colleague Dave. He's a massive ice hockey fan as well. We could go see Guildford play the Flames at the Spectrum. We could get tickets. Again, hypothetically, there could be a local lockdown in Guildford. Same with Milton Keynes. Same with Slough. Slough actually looks very likely in having a local lockdown. And that's where Bracknell, the Bees are now playing, and the Jets. So you have two teams sharing the facility, the hangar. And hypothetically, Slough could be one of those locations that goes into a local lockdown. Same could happen for Peterborough. Cases could rise there. Nottingham. We've already seen Leicester. Nottingham could have a similar situation. Sheffield. We've seen parts of Yorkshire and Lancashire get locked down. So Manchester's already in a lockdown. So you see where I'm getting from here. This is where there's going to be problems, not just in ice hockey, but in a variety of sports when it comes to allowing fans back in. This is why these are provisional dates the UK government are giving us. We've seen with Aberdeen what happened with Aberdeen with the local lockdown there, and then players testing positive. Do they have any broadcasting? They have their own YouTube channels and broadcast streams at the lower level, and they earn some income from that. It's not great, but they earn some. But most of the exposure comes through local media, not through national media, and that is also a problem. Back in the day, there was a national TV deal, and then that stopped. And then the Elite League managed to fight to get a deal with Premier and Free Sports, which is not a massive deal, but it's a deal nonetheless. So there needs to be more exposure of the sport, and it needs to be more than local level. Plain and simple. Sky used to have the TV rights to British ice hockey alongside the BBC, and then that fell apart in the early 2000s. And that's damn near killed the sport, killed the Super League, dead. And it affected, we go from season to season, every off season with another crisis. And we've seen it with the Bracknell Ice Rink closing, Basingstoke, we don't have that building, that keep standing. We've seen on the Isle of Wight, their rink's been vacant for 5 years or so, and locals are getting more and more frustrated with the Isle of Wight Council for doing nothing. And we're going to see the same at Bracknell. We're going to see the same at Basingstoke. There's going to be issues up and down the country where these arenas are not in public hands; they're in private company hands, and that's not a way to run a public facility. I have my political views on this. I have my social views on this. I think facilities like ice rinks and some football stadiums. I mean, some stadiums and arenas are owned by local councils. And we've seen issues there with the tenancy agreements with teams. So sometimes having these facilities in public hands doesn't work either. Look at the RICO with Coventry City and Wasps. That's an utter mess, and has been a mess from day one when the RICO was built. It's a mess, and yeah, the whole B situation. I mean, at some point we may see the John Knight get bought out by another investor, refurbed, rebuilt. We just don't know. But again, the situation was handled badly, and this comes down to investment in infrastructure and who owns the infrastructure. And a lot of people are saying the council should pull their finger out and actually step in. But now we found out the council are bailing out Everyone Active that runs lots of sports facilities. And Everyone Active also, guess what, runs Slough Ice Rink. Now, Slough Council have a different agreement with them, but Everyone Active is a company that has council contracts to run sports facilities. And this is another issue. They're privatising the running of facilities, and it's not working. Yeah, it's not. It's only a half-size rink as well, and residents have already kicked off about that. It's got to go through planning permission. The council are under pressure to build a full-size rink. They're feeling the heat from us, But I no longer live in Bracknell. I've moved to Wokingham now. I'm further down the road in Finch Hampstead, so I'm not in Bracknell anymore. I've said my piece about the situation with the John Nike and how that was handled, and I'm very disgruntled. And I basically had an online argument with Bracknell Council, the head of Bracknell Council, who I basically called a fascist twat because he is. I've had my spat with the local Conservative Party in Bracknell Forest. Many others are also unhappy with how leisure and sports facilities are funded for community, and that is an ongoing issue. Is sports and facility infrastructure at grassroots level, and it will continue to be so. It doesn't matter what sport it is or what facility it is, leisure facility. If they're talking about an obesity crisis, and if they're talking about oh no, you can't have three teams in the same building. You can't have two teams from the same league. So Basingstoke are really gonna be really stuffed. They're likely There's two likely locations. They can go down Gosport and be a Hampshire-based team, like Bracknell would now become a Berkshire-based team, or they can share with Guildford, because Guildford don't have a team in Basingstoke's league. That's going to become problematic because Guildford play in a higher level, and you have the Champions Hockey League. So if Guildford were to become champions of this country, they would play in the Champions Hockey League, and they would need that facility for European games. It's a mess. And Basingstoke's rink's in worse state than Bracknell's rink was, and Bracknell's rink needs 9 million investment. And John Knight refused. Well, that's what they claim. I don't think it needs that much, but we've heard different figures given at different times during the lockdown. It's basically just John Knight were profiteering capitalists. That's my personal opinion, and I'm happy with that on the public record, because for 15 years, chronic underinvestment and mismanagement has led to this. And I asked the question, was this whole situation avoidable? And I said yes. If they had regularly invested every summer in small bits of maintenance, we wouldn't be in the situation, and it would cost a whole lot less to refurb that building. Oh, Guildford, the Spectrum's got problems with the roof and always has done since the day it was built. The Guildford Spectrum is the same age as John Nike's, the same age as the Bison Arena, Basingstoke. They're all built in the late 80s with three different companies with very similar designs, and they're all in terrible nick, basically. And that comes down to maintenance. That comes down to investment, and that comes down to, well, having public facilities in private hands for profit, which I think is wrong. Don't get me wrong. I would happily pay an extra £5 a month in council tax to make sure public facilities were kept out of private hands and were run by local government for local people. I would happily pay extra. I'm not a communist by any means. I'm not a socialist. Not the Labour Party, but I would happily pay a little bit extra out of my council tax to make sure facilities like ice rinks and football pitches and golf courses, because the Downshire Golf Complex around the corner from where I live is run by Bracknell Forest Council through Everyone Active. But now we've found out that Everyone Active hasn't been paying their part of, the deal, and has been bailed out to the tune of, I think, 2.6 to 3 million. Just in Bracknell Forest Council. We're not including Slough, we're not including other contracts that Everyone Active has with other councils. And Bracknell Forest Council are paying to bail out a company that is failing. And some of the decisions that the council and the company have come up with parking fees and entrance fees to facilities which didn't exist before or were lower has also backfired. Mate, you look across Europe and there is more community involvement in their facilities, and more community involvement, even if it isn't paid for by the local state or the local city or the local council. The community does have facilities owned by the community. The members basically own the facility, and there is an issue in this country with privatising into private companies for profit facilities that are used by the community. And that is wrong. That system has to change. Has to change. Because if it doesn't, we're going to have a crisis where sports teams on a professional or semi-pro level are without a home. Look at Coventry City. Look at Coventry. I mean, Bracknell have the Bracknell Bees. It's going to be weird calling the Berks just the Bees. Same with the London Raiders, the Romford Raiders. They were without an ice a rink for 4 or 5 years. They were basically wandering East London and Essex and playing at Lee Valley and playing in Chelmsford and playing all over the place, playing in Romford and all that, until they finally came to a solution where they got a new arena built. And it's a fantastic facility. Streatham, they have petitioned the council. The council put under a lot of pressure. They rebuilt. They did a spectrum basically where they had multiple facilities in one building, and it's an amazing little arena. It's well built. Unfortunately, Bracknell Council don't seem to want to care. Basingstoke and Dean Council don't seem to want to care. You know why? Because they're run by Conservatives. But that's my political rant over. I want to keep politics out of this, but I do believe that I don't know how long the Link Centre can survive in its current format with free parking. I don't think there's enough retail units left in the little shopping centre to help also pay for the ice rink. I think there's going to have to be a change somewhere. But Bracknell Ice Rink had no parking fees either. Part of the detriment, if they put a parking fee in, a couple of quid, you pay for your ticket for the night, I think that could have helped financially assist with paying for the upkeep. There were some bad business models, but this is the problem, having facilities, private ownership for profit, which are used by the public in the sense of recreation and sport at lower levels. There is a massive issue with privatising everything. But again, that's my political viewpoint. I'm not a socialist, but I do think when it comes to sports facilities and leisure and recreation facilities, they need to be better run for the community, by the community. That's my principle. I do believe in free economics, but I do believe there are certain facilities and things, certain services that need to be run by state for the benefit of everyone. Paid for by. I would happily pay that little bit extra in council tax to make sure something like a Bracknell Ice Rink or a Basingstoke Ice Rink, Slough, was paid for by the taxpayer. What they've done with the hangar is not brilliant, it's not the best, but it's a massive improvement from what state it was in before its refurb. What's happened with the Raiders, with Romford, brilliant new facility. Streatham, brilliant new facility. Basingstoke, Peterborough, Cardiff's new facility. Cardiff's new rink is brilliant. It's smaller, well done. Guildford has problems with the spectrum. That facility, which is a multi-use facility, which has an ice rink, swimming pool, bowling alley, restaurant, does need significant love and attention. The roof has got problems. But then you go to look at the Ricoh and Coventry City and Wasps and look at that situation. Wasps now own the stadium. Coventry City Football Club should never have left Highfield Road. The way that development was handled with the city corporation and all sorts and the Ricoh is just an absolute mess. Absolute mess, and has been for a decade and a half. Yeah, no, the whole situation with the bees, there was a massive growth in the sport in the community, and they've taken that away from us. And the catchment area was more than just Bracknell. It was Wokingham, it was Reading, it was Ascot, it was Maidenhead, Windsor. It clashed with Slough, but Slough declined in, going down the leagues. Big catchment area, and the owners, this is the problem. But am I done with British ice hockey watching it? I'll obviously be watching a lot less than what I was before, and it's a shame. It's a shame. But I don't want to argue on this live stream just solely about the crisis that is British ice hockey every off season. We have this every off season. We saw it with the Edinburgh Capitals going out of business a couple of years ago. We've seen it with the Basingstoke situation, just rumbling on with no end in sight. And that building is in the worst condition I've ever seen a public facility. And then I look at issues with Peterborough's rink isn't great either. Anything to do with Planet Ice. I mean, Invicta having to crowdfund for survival, Milton Keynes going through financial issues. Anything wrong by Planet Ice, the teams suffer, the community suffers. Personal opinion, not a big fan of their business model. But you look at the Isle of Wight rink in Ryde, hasn't been open for several years now. Community's really pissed off that a private company is keeping the door shut and the council doing nothing. And there is pressure now and a growing anger that facilities, it's not just ice rinks, it's football pitches, it's sports, it's astroturfs, it's golf courses, tennis courts, it's a whole host of problems. I mean, Leeds have just got a brand new facility, and there's two ice rinks in Sheffield. There's two, it's a big one and then a really big one. But yeah, there is massive concern about the long-term future of grassroots sports facilities. And I mean, Bracknell Town Football Club is going to be forced to move out of Bracknell because they can't get land to build a new football stadium because they want to go fully professional and they can't do that at Larges Lane, and they're being forced out. And the council again don't want to assist. And people wonder why there's a growing obesity crisis in this country. People wonder why the quality of sport we are getting is declining. In my view, I think at the top level, it's not as good. And there is a lot of money in sport, and for some reason, it's not reaching the grassroots level where it is needed the most, where it is desperately needed to improve public health, public fitness, community spirit. That's not there. It's all about the money. It's all about making as much money as possible and taking it out. This is why I'm not happy with CVC Investment Capital investing in British sport, because what they are venture capitalists. They want to get a profit on their investment. And the NRL were approached by CVC, and the Queensland and New South Wales Rugby League boards told to F off, said no. They vetoed it straight up. Because what's going to happen is when you have something like CVC, it's not just that. When you have an investment capital firm, what they will do is they'll put money in, maximise their profits and take the money out. And it doesn't go to grassroots. It doesn't go to a semi-pro professional club. It goes into the pockets of the investment capitalists. And the NRL, to their credit, told them to stick it, which in my mind was the right answer. Told them to shove it. And I'm glad that the NRL did. Yes, the NRL could use an injection of cash, but that's the wrong type of injection of cash. What you need to do is get new sponsors, new prospective owners, expansion, and negotiate a good TV deal. We are going down that line of growing the game that way. Do not. I think we've gone a bit off sport now into more politics and economics, but I have my views on certain things. And while as I say, I'm not a socialist, I'm not a communist, but I do believe sport and leisure facilities should be run by the local community for the local community. It is plain and simple. It should not be in the hands of private profiteering capitalists. End of. Companies like Planet Ice have proven time and time again that they are not fit to operate ice rinks. Look at I use Basingstoke as an example every time. I use Milton Keynes as an example every time. I use Invicta as an example every time. When a semi-pro professional kind of level team has to crowdfund to survive to make sure it can pay its staff and complete a season, that tells you something has gone terribly, terribly wrong. Because the operator of their arena was basically going, give us all the money. Was charging them too much. And it's just unacceptable. People have lost their jobs because of this. And yeah, COVID didn't help, but this is pre-COVID. There were problems across the board. The Bracknell Bees almost went out of business multiple times. I think 3 times. They've now moved and found a new location, but they're going to make less revenues because they're playing in a smaller arena. So it's something that should never have come to pass. Had the John Knight Group properly invested every off season, just a little bit of maintenance, just the little bits and pieces, and not been cheap and profiteering, we wouldn't be in the situation. Had Bracknell Forest Council actually had some guts and real leadership, rather than just going, oh, we can build some houses here, we can get some property developers in and make some money. And those allegations haven't gone away that they're taking backhanded, and they refute them. That's a disgraceful allegation. Well, we know there's actually council officials have been found guilty of taking dodgy payments. The council I work for, one of the councils was done for dodgy financial property deals. It happened. It's a thing. Um, it, but I want to get off politics, but there is an issue with sports facilities. The fact that clubs are having sports teams are having to crowdfund just to get facilities up to a decent level is not good enough. Yes, the Guildford Flames do still have a team in the EIHL. When players are allowed to resume in British ice hockey, it's just a wait and see. We just don't know when British ice hockey is allowed to resume. I've got a friend of mine who I work with, obviously plays amateur level, and he's not even sure if he wants to go back playing because now his coaches are asking for his full medical records. They're asking for this and that, and they have to follow these protocols so they can train. Bearing in mind, he has a full-time job, 2 kids, and a crazy partner. He's just like, do I really want to go through all this? I'm 38. No, my mate's 38 at the weekend, and he goes, "Do I really want to go through this when I've got 2 kids to put through school? My his partner's not been very well. She got furloughed for 3.5, 4 months, so money's tight. He has to pay to play. Equipment is expensive, and they're not getting the assistance they need to. And they've now lost one of their arenas that they play in, which is the Bracknell Arena. And Basingstoke is not in great nick, and that means Slough is getting more and more congested with more, teams using it. But the fact that like the Bracknell Hornets have gone, the drones have gone, the youth setup has been destroyed overnight. Yeah, it is an absolute disgrace that we got to this point. But I don't want to whinge about it anymore. I'm done talking about it now because I'm going to get more and more angry, and then probably someone will sue me for defamation. I don't have any money to be sued for, so it'll be interesting. But this is where I get loads of subscribers going, yeah, we'll subscribe to this, and I get monetized, and then someone sues me for defamation. I'll be like, or slander. I'll be like, well, that's my personal view on it. May not be fact. My personal view, I think the John Knight Group and the Knight family are bastards, and the local council are bastards. That's my personal opinion. You could say the same about the Basingstoke and Dean situation with Basingstoke Ice Rink. That is utter shambles. And if that is the worst maintained rink in the country, it makes you wonder why the Bracknell rink and John Knight couldn't be asked to put some money in. It does make you wonder what's going to happen with Basingstoke and the future of British ice hockey. It does. I mean, am I still an ice hockey fan? Absolutely, it's still my favourite sport. But the way it is governed, not just in this country but across the board, is an absolute shambles. And the Guildford Flames, as far as I'm aware, still have a team. I'm not aware of any announcement saying that they're in jeopardy, but there are issues with Guildford Spectrum, mostly to do with the roof. The roof leaks, and there needs to be some refurb done there at some point. But God knows what's going to happen. It is a mess, and we don't know when the seasons are going to restart or start. They're going to start late. British ice hockey needs fans in attendance, so the future of the sport as a whole in this country. Is it one worse than the other sports? Well, let's have a think. I always use the Australian sports as an example because they managed to get restarted back in, was it end of May or beginning of June? I think it was the end of May that the NRL and AFL in Australia got restarted. They got fans back in attendance. They restarted on round 3 in the last week of May. By round 7, they had fans back in the stadium. So in Australia and New Zealand, they worked out how to restart their sports. Is British ice hockey or ice hockey in general any worse? I think when you talk about ice hockey, or in this case, we'll call it hockey, and looking how it's governed and run, the IIHF run the international game and sanction competitions. The way the NHL went about the bubble situation and having hub cities, they were initially wanting 4 and they settled on 2, Edmonton and Toronto. They've managed to do that quite well. Obviously, the AHL and ECHL, there's concerns going forward. Will they be able to play games in the season? Will those franchises and affiliates, be able to survive? Will the junior level and the SPHL and other minor leagues survive? That is a wait and see on that one. But they managed to get the playoffs restarted. they managed to get going in a bubble. They did. I think they've done the best out of the major league sports in North America. The CFL decided, no, we're not going to even attempt to restart. Major League Soccer obviously did their tournament in Orlando. Unfortunately, 2 teams had to pull out because of the virus. Major League Baseball's a mess. The NFL is a mess. The NBA, okay, they've sort of got going. Major League Rugby's in its infancy. This is the first issue they've had to face in their organisation's history. Yeah, I think European football dealt with the situation quite badly. There was no universal, right, we're just going to stop the leagues. We're just going to just call it a day for this season. It was up to the individual FAs to come to decisions about whether to restart, suspend, call it a day. And then in each individual country, some leagues restarted, some didn't. The Champions League and Europa League, they said initially they were going to suspend indefinitely. We may not start up again. Now they're going to, they've started to qualify for the Europa and Champions League for this coming season. In Scotland, football's already restarted, but in the rest of Europe, it's going to start on the 12th of September. We're not sure when fans are going to be allowed back in attendance. There's different dates given by different governments. There's no, universal decision by UEFA to go, right, okay, football's dealt with it shambolically. Rugby League, the Toronto Wolfpack, they've pulled out. There's no relegation promotion. They're not restarting the Championship. They're not restarting League One. So that throws the Challenge Cup into a restructuring mess. The RFL, however, to their credit, went to the government saying, look, don't give the money to the Super League. This is for the whole game because of the community-based aspect of the game, both in England and in France. We need money. We need money for the community game at amateur and semi-pro level to survive in order to then support the higher semi-pro and pro leagues in order for the game to go. So the British and French governments gave the RFL money, saying, look, here you go, here's a loan. So Rugby League, in a sense, yes, has sort of dealt with the lockdown reasonably well, but the Toronto Wolfpack situation, will they even have a team for next season? Will they be able to recruit it? So there's an issue with what the Super League is going to look like next season. Is the Wolfpack coming back? Probably not. Some professional sports have dealt. I mean, I like how the British touring cars has dealt with the situation. Less teams are on the grid this year, which is a shame. Some teams haven't been able to get the sponsors together, although they are aiming to. I mean, one team came back in the 3rd race meet. They missed the first 2 race meetings. They missed the first 6 races. They came back with only one of their 2 cars, which is a shame, but they're back on the grid. So some teams that can't complete a full season, they're just doing partial seasons. But British touring car package that includes all the support races, support series, and support teams, they have sort of come back. They've condensed the schedule. They've dropped one of the routes. So, Rockingham's off the calendar, which is brilliant because Rockingham's a shit circuit and should never be on the calendar in the first place. They've come back, which is nice. Obviously, no fans being there is a shame. But if fans are allowed back for the 1st of October, they can at least watch a couple of the rounds before the end of the season, which may help financially. But they have a TV deal, so every race is live on ITV, which is great. But they are also heavily reliant on fans turning up to racetracks to help pay for the sport. And they have a reduced grid, which is a crying shame. I mean, they're 10 drivers down from where they were last year. So that's a shame. So motorsport, I think, has actually dealt with things quite well. Tennis, it's been a shambles globally, absolute shambles. Golf hasn't been great either, absolute shambles. Cycling, the 3 Grand Tours are going to take place at the same time. Never happened before. So the Vuelta, the Giro, and the Tour de France all taking place at the same time. Absolutely bananas that they're doing that. But again, professional cycling, I think it's a difficult one. Professional road race cycling is a difficult one, but I think they've dealt with it as best they can. Unfortunately, social distancing with fans at the side of the road, that's going to be difficult. So how they're going to deal with that, we'll see. The Tour de France starts in 5 days. So I'll be watching some of the stages of the Tour de France when I can. That's going to be really interesting how the cyclists and the teams deal with the fans being very, very close, especially in the mountain stages when you're going up Mont Ventoux, for example. Fans are there. But they're going to try and complete all races with the full complement of stages. We've already seen some of the prequel races, the the Dauphiné and things like that. Paris-Nice, they've taken place as the warm-up races for the Tour de France, the warm-up races for the Vuelta, the warm-up races for the one-day classics. They've sort of taken place. So, yeah, but that's a sport more reliant on sponsorship and TV revenue rather than fans in attendance, because obviously you don't have paid match, the tickets. You don't have tickets. It's just fans stand side the road. That's a sport that can survive without fans being in attendance. But I think the Australian rugby league and Aussie rules, I think, have been the best in return. How we go about going forward, I think football's been dealt with shambolically. Tennis has been a shambles. I think it depends on the sport, really. But some sports really have screwed up massively. Basketball just doesn't get any coverage at all. Basketball, yes, there's an NBA TV deal, but again, it comes to grassroots interest, facilities, and school involvement. And it was one of those optional PE lessons for a lot of kids, and it was only compulsory until a certain age. And not every school has a sports hall, and you need a sports hall. Outdoor courts isn't great when it's pissing down with rain or snowing or foggy. You just can't play it outside. And you need an indoor court really to play it properly. And not every school or college has an indoor sports hall. It's a fact of life. And you could ask yourself why basketball hasn't really kicked on. I mean, there is a professional league in this country. It just doesn't get the revenue. It is a long-standing problem, and kids aren't interested in it. There is clearly an interest, because otherwise, why would we have the NBA TV deal with Scott and BT? Why would there be a subscription sports, deal? But the NFL for the North American sports and the NHL get more viewership, and you've got a TV deal for the NFL. You have a TV deal for the NHL, and they're worth more than the TV deal for the NBA in this country. And the NHL has been to Belfast. The Belfast Giants played the Boston Bruins in an exhibition preseason game, I think 2007. The NFL comes here every year. The NBA does come here for one game per season, or 2 games per season. So out of the major sports, yes, the NBA does come to Europe, primarily to the UK, but it doesn't have as big a reach as the NFL. And for some reason, it doesn't have a bigger fan base as the NHL. So the 2 other major leagues have a bit more reach. And then with Major League Soccer, there are preseason friendlies with European clubs all the time. So, and there's transfers between the clubs, and players have played in North America, have also played in Europe. So I do think that, yes, there has been issues with basketball. Is it governance? Is it funding? Is it interest from outside the Afro-Caribbean community? Because it is seen as a black man's sport, and it's a cultural thing. But I do think it's bigger in continental Europe as basketball. It has a massive following in Eastern Europe, because the state governments back in the Cold War really put a lot of funding into beating the US. That's why the Russian team was so good in the 70s and 80s. And across Eastern Europe, especially in the Balkans, it is really, really popular. Same in Italy. Anywhere that the US has got a large military presence, in Europe, it's popular, and Eastern Europe, it's very popular because it was sponsored and funded by state governments to a stupid amount of money, because it was one of the Olympic sports. Not so much, and it's a cultural thing, and it's an easy sport to play. You only need I forget the numbers on a basketball court per team at any one time, but you don't need as many players as football or rugby or cricket for a team. A bunch of mates can play it. I think the issue is, money, exposure, and an interest from kids outside of and it's not outside of certain communities. I think big urban areas like London and Birmingham and Glasgow and Manchester, there is a desire for it to be played. But is the facilities there? Is the investment there? The grassroots, the coaches. You need coaches. You need coaches to coach kids and adults. You need an amateur game. you need a youth game, and you need to engage with not just private state education, but set up youth clubs. It just doesn't happen. There isn't that interest to have that other team sport. And also, it's an optional sport on the sports curriculum. It's one of those niche sports on the school curriculum, and that's a problem. I think there is an issue, but I think British ice hockey, because we're in the top tier of world championship level, the funding will increase. Basketball, the Olympic legacy is just not there. We were told after London 2012 we'd have this Olympic legacy, and a lot of sports had their funding cut. Basketball was one of them, partly because we're not very good at it, but we do have some NBA players who are registered to play for Britain, who say internationally I play for Britain, and we have British players playing in the NBA. Not many. We have a handful, but not many. But the league isn't great. There is clearly not enough people interested in watching and playing the sport. It's a niche sport when it comes to education. Not every school has a sports hall. Not every school has access to a facility to play basketball indoors. It's an issue, and it is one of those optional sports at PE. And a lot of kids, they look at the optional sport. They would rather play football. They would rather play rugby, cricket. Those who play ice hockey do it in their spare time with the youth club at the local ice rink. That's an optional extra that their family have decided to go, right, we'll pay for our kids' equipment, we'll pay for our kids' lessons. So that's not even on the curriculum at all. And that's down to the parents. And that's across the board around the world. It's more family decide that the kid wants to play. I do think, yeah, there is an issue. But there's also, is there the interest? Yeah, there's an image problem. They don't sell the game to the wider community. They don't sell the game to sponsors. They don't sell the games. They don't sell the sport outside of the inner city, primarily poor, primarily Afro-Caribbean community. And it's the same with ice hockey being seen as a middle-class white boy sport. It's not. There are some really good ethnic players in this country who play at various levels. I've seen them play. They are very, very good. But again, it's the image. It's what it's perceived to be. Ice hockey seen as the white man sport. Basketball seen as the black man sport. And then you get to rugby league. That's the working class northern sport. Rugby union is the posh boy, tough sport. And football is everyone can just get a ball and have a kick about. And cricket is also seen as public schoolboy, kind of the summer version of rugby union. The toffs play it. When actually a lot of state schools do play cricket. But it's not really advertised enough. And this is where you need to get schools involved. They have the facilities that they can either rent or on site growing various sports. And rugby league needs to grow in the south of England. That's where the money's at. Rugby union has won the amateur game and the semi-pro game across the country. Rugby league is badly governed. It's the old boys club. Yeah, you've got Grenell Park. There's a few other players who have mixed heritage as well. There's some Asian players of Oriental Asian, I say. To be fair, over recent seasons, I've seen more and more kids of Asian, and when I say Asian, I mean South Asian and Oriental Asian, and Afro-Caribbean heritage, and families of minority heritage watching the sport and playing the sport. It's a thing. It is a thing that exists. Unfortunately, it's not advertised enough. I'm not a fan of basketball because I don't enjoy playing the sport. I don't enjoy watching the sport. It's got nothing to do with the fact that I did play it at school, but after a certain age, it became optional. And because I had it was optional and I didn't enjoy playing it and I didn't really have the skill set to be any good at it, I just ended up playing rugby, cricket, and football because it suited my enjoyment level in my skill set, and they weren't optional; they were compulsory on the sports choices. I also played a bit of field hockey as well. So the sports that I played weren't optional. And I actually enjoyed them more because I could play certain positions that suited my skill set. Mostly in field hockey and football, I was a goalkeeper. Rugby union, I was an outside back. Cricket, I was just a lower order, medium pace bowler who could also bat a bit. And I could field on the boundary because I could run. So in reality, the sports that I ended up playing, I enjoyed playing them and I played to a decent standard because the positions that you can play and the roles you play in those team sports suited my abilities. Basketball, I wasn't tall enough. I didn't have the hand-eye coordination with the big ball. I just didn't enjoy it. I did not enjoy the sport as a kid. And therefore, if I didn't enjoy it, I'm not likely to watch it when it comes to the Olympics or professional sport, when it comes to world championships or actual professional league, I mean, on the telly. I played a bit of Aussie rules at school. I played a bit of rugby league at school, and I actually enjoyed watching them as well. So there was no interest there. It had nothing to do with my background. It just was a sport that I didn't really get into playing, and I didn't really get into watching, and that is a problem. It's actually getting the interest of those kids in wanting to play it and wanting to watch it. And yes, there is clearly an interest in watching the sport from sports fans as a wider thing, but there isn't as much interest in playing it because it's an optional sport at school. It's not standard on the curriculum. It's an optional sport that if you get enough numbers, you can form a team or two and then play, other schools and colleges and universities because it's optional choice. So again, it's about grassroots. It's about the image is perceived to be, and there's not the money in it. There's not the money. If the salary cap for a whole team is £250,000 per year, that's less than the Battle Bees budget for last season, which I think was 350,000 for the team budget. So if the professional sports budget for basketball is £250,000, yet the budget for the second tier the budget of the second tier ice hockey team is £1/3 of £1 million, and they're classed as semi-pro, that tells you there's a problem with not enough money in the sport, and therefore you're not going to attract better players and improve the quality because a player I can make this actually my full-time job and I can do this as a full-time job, earn a salary of let's say 30 grand a year because a basketball squad's a lot smaller, live comfortably and not have to do a second job. That's the situation. Diversity problem. Yes, there is a higher percentage of players come from the Afro-Caribbean community across the board, across the world. That's including the NBA. There's a fair few white players who do play it because they actually enjoy playing it. You look at the NBA, there's a lot of white players, but the superstars, how many of them are white? It is seen as a black man's sport. Baseball is seen as a Latino sport in North America. There's a lot of Dominicans, Cubans, Venezuelans who play baseball. Puerto Ricans. It's seen as a Latino sport, Major League Baseball. There's a lot of Latinos who play that sport. A lot of Japanese as well. So there is this stereotype that it's only played by certain players. And that's a boundary that needs to be broken down. The fact that every London Lions player in their team is from an Afro-Caribbean background, is that a problem? Well, you have to see what the white kids in the catchment area want to play. You have to ask them, do you want to play basketball? Do you have an interest in playing basketball? And if they say, no, I want to play football or cricket or tennis, probably most likely football in the city area, there's your answer. They want to kick a ball rather than bounce a ball. And yet they're given the same opportunities as the Afro-Caribbean kids. The black or mixed race kids that play basketball, they just choose to play football. It's a cultural thing as well. I honestly believe the best way to grow interest is first you raise the profile of the sport and say it's accessible for all, because basketball is a cheap sport to play. We use a ball and a bunch of mates and a court to play. And there are a fair few white players, but there is the stereotype. Ice hockey is seen as there's no black or Asian guys playing the sport, which is wrong. There's actually a significant portion and a growing number of ethnic minority players playing ice hockey globally, and that grows every year. But there's a growing number of state school kids who play rugby union and cricket, but it's always seen as the public school boys' game, whereas rugby league is seen as the state school working class. Uh, and I mean, again, it's stereotypes. We need to break them down, and this is where the sports need to highlight their minority players from minority backgrounds reaching the top level internationally or nationally. They need to go, look at this guy. You can be this guy. You can be this guy, or girl, because women as well. But there is an issue, and you have to ask yourself why white kids from the same inner city area don't want to play basketball, or why affluent minorities, so those in the minority grouping who may go to public school, why do they don't want to take on cricket or rugby further on? Why is it that the South Asian community likes cricket, whereas the Oriental Asian community seems to like ice hockey and football more? You have to ask these questions: why no Asians want to play rugby league or rugby union? When it comes to like Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, why they want to play cricket? And you have to look at their home countries where they're initially from, and you go, oh yeah, it's field hockey and cricket are the national sports there. That's why they like playing it over here when they're second or third generation immigrants. So there is a social thing, and again, you have to see if they are interested in playing other sports. Because when I was at school, the Indian, Pakistani, and Bangladeshi and Sri Lankan kids, two sports they played really well: cricket and field hockey. They weren't as good as football. They weren't very good at rugby. They just didn't have the interest. When it came to field hockey as an optional sport, it wasn't compulsory, it was optional. Most of the Asian kids chose field hockey because guess what? In Pakistan and India, it's actually the national sport, not cricket. And when it came to summer, the optional sports were like tennis, badminton, golf. They all chose cricket, which was the compulsory sport. They could opt out. They all chose cricket. Oh look, yeah. If a professional sports team in a mixed race country, which this country is, because there are minority demographics, was 100% white, there would be a question. And guess what? Rugby league and some rugby union teams are 100% white, and the questions aren't being had. And you have to ask yourself why the minority groups don't want to play those sports in those locations. I mean, rugby league does have a large South Sea Island contingent who do play, and an overseas mixed race contingent of Aboriginal Australians who do play. But until the 80s, 70s, 80s, before the player swaps started happening more and more regularly because the strengthening Australian dollar, because they obviously changed currency in the 60s and 70s. Until that point, no. We're talking. There's no Jason Robinson. Okay. There's no. I'm trying to think of Gordon Tallis, for example. There you go. There's Gordy. He's a mixed race Aboriginal white guy from Queensland, Australia. Legend of the game, Gordy. We didn't get these players crossing over. We didn't. I'm trying to think of a Fire. That's his name. The Wigan winger from the 80s and 90s who scored 5 tries in a Challenge Cup final. Until the 80s and the 90s, we didn't have that minority player playing at the top level in rugby league. Same in rugby union. We had very few. Yeah. If today you were to have a sports team that was 100% white, or in basketball's case, 100% black, you would have the question. Most likely, if it was 100% white, you would have the question in this country. But then you have to ask yourself, well, why are the minorities not wanting to play the sport? Is it because the team is 100% white that they feel intimidated to do so? And it's not a hard conversation to have. Yeah, rugby league. I mean, most rugby league teams are in towns with large South Asian communities, and there's not a single Asian playing at the top level that I can think of off the top of my head. Not a single Asian, at least in this country. I know in Australia there's a couple of mixed race players. You've got African or Oriental or even South Asian heritage who are mixed race playing. In the Super League, I can't think off the top of my head any South Asian players at all. Doesn't mean they don't want to play or they're not involved at the community level, but I just can't think of any. Because they primarily play cricket, field hockey, it's their personal choice. But the question has to be had why there isn't that outreach and that growth. Because the South Asian community is sports mad. You give them a cricket bat, you give them a hockey stick, they want to play. There's in where I used to live, the Bangladeshi and Indian communities. You had Hindus and Muslims and Sikhs. A group of them would play cricket every Sunday. A bunch of mates would just play cricket in the park every Sunday without fail, from April through to October. They'll be playing, and they even turn up in winter occasionally if the weather's decent enough and it's dry, and just have a little play. They get a couple of cricket bats, a couple of homemade stumps, and they play. And it's brilliant to watch them play because the joy they have in just putting bat to ball and having a group session where they're just playing, it's brilliant to watch. The African community where I used to live have a couple of white guys play with them. I was one of them. Play football, just a little kick about in the park. You can get that, but you have to ask the question why. You have to ask the question why, when it comes to professional top level sport, there isn't this outreach to say, look, this is what our sport's about. Do your kids want to play? Do you want to get involved in the community amateur level? And that comes down to the governance of the sport as well. And it has been said that rugby league's governance in the UK is back with Old Boys Club. And when you've only got one Indian heritage English football player playing for a club in Swansea, for example, that isn't good enough. Not good enough. It really isn't. Because I look at the England cricket team and the South African cricket team, and they have Asians, they have blacks, they have whites, they have mixed race guys, both teams. Same with the rugby union. Why is it then? Actually, you'll find that the national sport of India is field hockey. Same with Pakistan and Bangladesh. It's field hockey first, cricket second, and other sports are now growing in popularity because of they've got relatives in Europe, they've got relatives in North America, and they're now being exposed to other professional sports. But it's a cultural thing where field hockey first, cricket second. Always has been. Snooker was invented in India, there you go. But the Chinese have taken that on as their new sport of interest. But snooker, invented in India. Jewish English football players, there have been some. There have been actually quite a few who of Jewish heritage, and rugby as well. There's been a few. Whether they're openly Jewish or not, that's another thing. But there have been, over the years, Jewish football players of faith. Again, it's a community thing. You have to understand, ask the questions why they're not participating as much or not interested in such a thing. But in the past, Arsenal and Tottenham have had Jewish players on their books. I mean, look, I myself, my background, I've got Irish, both a Catholic and Protestant heritage. I've got a bit of Arab in me. I'm a bit of a Mongol, really, and I think the issue is when the hard left. It's not the far left; it's the hard left and the far right. When they get involved in the conversation and they're the ones leading it, that's when you have problems. When you try to have a conversation with someone of hard left leaning about inclusiveness in sport and asking the questions why, they're saying, "Oh, we must have more inclusiveness. We must have, BAMI coaches. Why don't we have BA black and Asian minority, coaches and board members? We have to have them. So, but they've got to be qualified. There's a reason why Paul Ince failed as a manager. There's a reason why Sol Campbell's failed as a manager. Chris Hughton's done all right. Rosinia has done all right in the lower leagues. You have to ask the question. It's not because there's a lack of opportunity. It's because they're not very good. You judge them results, not the colour of your skin in management. You judge them results. Jean Tigana, He was a brilliant manager for Fulham. Got them in the Premier League. He got sacked because he wasn't good enough. Laurie Sanchez, he's got Latino in him. He got sacked because he wasn't good enough at Fulham. Yeah, I mean, you judged on results. Plain and simple. Football is a results-driven business. And Paul Ince was a Premier League manager, got sacked at Blackburn because he wasn't good enough. But in the lower leagues, he's done a brilliant job. You give him a lower league club, yeah, Premier League club, the pressure's on, especially a club that's won the Premier League and won silverware, couldn't perform, could not get it right. Got found out with the pace of the game at the top level is different to the lower league. Doesn't mean he's a bad manager, he just wasn't good enough at Blackburn. Chris Hughton, I think, is one of the best managers of ethnic minorities. Nuno Wolves manager, Nuno Santos, Espirito Santo, brilliant manager, mixed race, with Latino heritage. I think making it a tick box exercise, we've seen it in the NFL, it backfires. You get managers and coaches and board members who aren't up to standard because of their gender or the colour they've got the job. It should be done on merit, and you should be colourblind in this. When you look at a job application form now, it's what gender are you? What religion are you? What colour? I'm like, I'm a bloke. My sexuality's got nothing to do with it. My nationality's got nothing to do with it. Do I speak English as a first language? Yes. That's it. That's what it should be. Bang. What gets me is I'm all for diversity. I'm all for increasing the sporting profile to ethnic minorities, to the female side of things. I actually like women's football. I don't try and compare it to the men's game. It doesn't work. It's almost not quite a different sport, but it's played in a different way and to a different standard. And all these people on the right going, oh, it's crap. Well, it's not the same as the men's game, which guess what which I personally think football has declined in quality in the men's game and improved massively in the women's game. Ironically, I love women's football. It's more physical. There's no diving in the game. They really go to try and break each other's legs when they tackle. The tackle from behind is still a thing in women's football, apparently, and knee-high challenges are still a thing, apparently. Watching the Champions League final last night, Neymar, my God, if that happened in the women's game, if that was in the women's game, he's getting booked for his histrionics. Men's game, it's accepted. I do think it's American. I mean, it's the same with commentators. They're really pushing the agenda of you've got to have the minority commentator, you've got to have the women. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, fine. Claire Balding has been a presenter and commentator for nearly 3 decades. Brilliant. Sue Barker has been involved in sports commentary for 3 decades. Brilliant. Competent at what they do. But then you look at some of the commentators they're pushing and they're not very good. I'm not going to lie. Same with the men's. There's some really incompetent men. Jake Humphrey, I've noticed, has been dropped from BT Sports Champions League and Europa League final coverage this year. He's hopeless. There's a reason why the BBC refused to pay him the salary he was asking, and he went to BT Sport. And to be quite frank, I think they want to get rid of him because he's costing the viewers. I used to listen to TalkSport, the Alan Brazil show. Now, obviously, he's gone down to 2 days a week, and I'm on a Facebook group, and the amount of people complaining about the current lineup Monday to Wednesday is unreal. It's a bunch of middle-aged men complaining because a middle-aged bloke is basically getting close to retirement, and they can't accept the fact that they have to move on. The fact that the people, I mean, look, Sky is part of the problem. It's a difficult one, but I like Jermaine Jenas because I think he was an underrated player and he's actually quite an intelligent footballing mind. I like Ian Wright because he speaks from a fan's point of view in the sense that he's the ultimate. He's not a very good pundit, I'll admit that. He gets a bit too passionate, a bit Arsenal and Palace biased when it comes to when Palace are playing, or especially Arsenal, because those are the 2 professional clubs he played for. But he gives it more as a fan's perspective because he talks with a lot of passion. I like Ian Wright. I like Jermaine Jenas. I think Jermaine Jenas, I mean, yeah, he's not the most expressive with his voice, but he's exceptionally intelligent when it comes to the game. You can't deny that. They're pretty competent, but some of the male presenters are just as bad as some of the women. They're not competent. I think when it comes to women's sport, there are some female sports stars that are superstars. The Williams sisters in tennis, for example. There's a few women's motorsport racers who are actually pretty good, who are better than men, and men don't like that. There's some athletes, track and field, who are absolutely amazing at what they do, and some of them deserve to get paid the money they're getting paid. As a whole, you got to think on the business side of things. What gets me is we're being forced diversity rather than allowing it to evolve naturally and increasing the grassroots participation. We're being forced. We've got to make more professional, all professional. The quality isn't there yet. You have to improve the grassroots level, the participation level at school, the facilities for the clubs to grow, rather than going, right, women's football's got to be fully professional now, bang. I'm like, well, actually, the quality isn't there yet. You're force feeding something that isn't ready to be at that level. You've got to start from the bottom up, not the top bottom. With women's sport, they're doing it the wrong way around. It's leading to a backlash against them, which is unfair because they're trying their best as athletes to get better. But you need to increase participation at the bottom level before you can demand the top level gets paid more. This is where they've gone wrong. They're trying to force the diversity rather than actually encouraging it at the grassroots level and at schools and at amateur clubs and socially. They're demanding it from the top. It should start at the bottom. The bigger base. It then will become more socially acceptable. But no, you can't have this conversation with someone on the hard left or the far right because the right wing don't want it at all because they're stuck in the 1950s, and the left wing want immediate change overnight that expects everything to go like that, and it takes sometimes a few years, sometimes a few decades to get natural evolution and the breakdown of barriers. If you're in the middle, you can't win. This is why I just post my YouTube videos on Twitter. I don't involve myself in political discussion anymore or sports discussion anymore to a point. I can discuss a match and go, this guy's a wally. I can discuss a player's suspension for a drugs offence, foul play, breach of contract. I don't get involved in the debate of politics anymore. And politics and sport should not mix. And we've seen this. While I'm in favour of the Black Lives Matter slogan, I'm not in favour of the political movement. Apparently that makes me a racist. No, as someone who has got friends of mixed race and of the Afro-Caribbean community and the Asian community, and as someone who himself technically has mixed race in me, I'm all for looking at profiling of race and of gender, because I've been regularly harassed by the police as a teenager because guess what? I'm a young white male out late at night. Who commits the most crime? Young males. Doesn't matter of race at this point. Who's the most likely to be a victim of crime? Young males under the age of 30. So I'm getting profiled. If you've got a group of 3 or more youth, which again is classed as someone between the age of 15, 16, 35, you're going to get profiled. So I am for, oh God, I would just tell both sides off because I'm a realist. I'm a pragmatist. There is issues with diversity in sport, but to force feed it down people's throats does the exact opposite effect of what you wanted to do because it creates further division. What you have to do is go out into the various communities and do a bit of research first. Ask the questions. What sport are you interested in? Would you like to get into this sport, that sport? Would you like to participate? Would you like to watch more? Would you like to see a women's league? Would you like to see more minorities playing rugby league? Right? But you can't have that debate with the right and the left. The right one going, oh, let's just send all the foreigners back where they come from, even though a lot of them, there's people of Polish descent playing rugby league. It's bizarre, isn't it? And the left wing want change overnight straight away, which cannot happen. It has to be phased in. And unfortunately, the media is very biased. I'm not a fan of the BBC. I think they've given up on trying to bid for. They've lost so many sports rights over the last 20 years. It's ridiculous. In fact, free to air is starting to claw back little bits of sports rights, little bits. But unfortunately, I think the BBC is has lost its way. And uh, I don't know how you go about it. What I do know is if you want to increase diversity and increase participation, you have to start at grassroots, and you have to first survey your fan base. You have to look at what your community that you want to set. But let's say I win the lottery tonight, and I win. I don't know, let's say I win the Euro Millions. Let's say I win the top prize the Euro Millions could ever pay out, right? And I wanted to set up a rugby league team in the south of England. I know you've got the Broncos and the Scholars in London. I think Hemel Hempstead have a team. I know Coventry have a team. Let's say I want to look at Berkshire. I know there's Reading up the road. I know I've got Bracknell and Wokingham in my local area. I know I've got Slough. I know I've got Newbury. I know there are big urban areas in Berkshire where I live. Let's say that I want to set up a rugby league team and grow the game, like Toronto have done in Canada, right? With the Wolfpack. First, I've got to think of a name and a logo and a mascot that isn't going to offend everyone because apparently that's a problem. But I want to see if there's an interest outside the traditional heartlands and London for a rugby league team. You've got to do your research, haven't you? Now, I do honestly believe that rugby league should expand to the South of England. It would benefit the game massively. I know there's quite a few Northerners that have moved down south for work. So I know there is a community of those from up north who are living down here in the south. What you've got to do is you've got to survey people. Do you watch rugby league when the international's on, when the Challenge Cup is on? Do you watch the Rugby League World Cup? Will you be watching the Rugby League World Cup? Do you watch the NRL? Because I know there's a lot of Australians and Kiwis over here as well, in this part of the world. I know quite a few of them. And then you have to, work out, you have to do your surveys. You would have to, reach out at the grassroots level. Is there an interest? Would you be interested? Here's some footage of rugby league. Would you want to play this game over rugby union? You've got to start at grassroots level, at a community level, across the board, across the spectrum. You've got to be colourblind. You've got to be gender blind. You've got to go, right, this is the community that I want to set up a team in. And you have to look at the whole spectrum of the community, regardless of background. And you have to listen to their feedback of what they want the team name to be. Do they want to play? Do they want to get involved? Do they want to watch? And that's how you get it. You fix the diversity problem. You have to go by community basis. You have to start at the grassroots. And unfortunately, those governing want to start at the top and demand automatic change. Unfortunately, they haven't got their fan bases on side. And they're the ones that are resisting the change, because the way the changes are being forced upon sports. They're not starting at community level. They're not starting at grassroots level where they're surveying the community. They're asking the questions. They're going out. They're saying, do you want to play football? Do you want to play rugby? Do you want to play cricket? Do you want to play ice hockey? Do you want to play rugby league? Do you want to, whatever the sport may be? And there's forced change at the top because of a minority group pressurising, mostly from the left. But then the fan base seems to be more against this forced change because it's, guess what, forced change and not natural change. And they're not having the right discussions with the fan base, with the community that the team is based in. And they're getting it wrong. While I do believe change is necessary, there are ways of doing it. And the way football and rugby and cricket, all the sports are going about it, is the wrong way, especially football. They're doing it the wrong way. They're not communicating with the communities where the sport is played. They're not communicating with the fan bases in the right way. They're not surveying them in the right way. They're not communicating with them. And there's a minority of the fan base that becomes very public in their resistance, to the change. And you end up with a toxic battle in the media, social media, and it therefore the diversity argument takes a step back. You have to do it at a community basis. You have to do it without the social media involvement, without the national media, you have to do it on a community basis. Each club going, right, we have an issue with diversity in our boardroom, in our fan base, in our playing base. We need to find out why. You need to ask the questions in your own organisation. And unfortunately, they're doing it very publicly in a very messy way. And you've got the two political extremes, which already hate each other anyway, one demanding immediate change and one resisting immediate change or any change at all. And the majority feel that they are being silenced because if they say what I'm saying, they get abuse from both sides and they just can't be bothered with it. They just want to live and let live. Most sports fans don't care about your gender, your sexuality, your colour of your skin, your religion. They don't care. When it gets really stupid is when the sports stars get political. And that's where the whole thing becomes an utter mess. Politics and sports should not mix on a professional sports basis. It just, right. Okay, there's a lot of questions that have just come up. It's the Americans that annoy me the most. They say no more immigrants, yet the entire nation is made up of immigrants, apart from the Native Americans who have been shoved on reservations because their land's been stolen over the last 400 years. The true American is pretty much whipped up. Yep. I wonder if Whitney Warriors will have changed their logo. Well, the Chelmsford Chieftains haven't. The Exeter Chiefs down in rugby league haven't. Rugby union, sorry, haven't. So it'd be interesting to see on that one. Bracknell Braves with a big chief mascot. Oh, God. Please tell us. I know it's a joke, but yeah, I would do something to do with the local history of the community. You know, the Berkshire Royals, for example, because we're a royal county. Because of Windsor Castle. But that's my personal opinion. If I was to set up a rugby league team or an ice hockey team or a rugby union team, if I made millions. Raiders, I haven't seen the warm-up jersey, but anything to do with showing support for other key workers, I like it. England squad gets announced tomorrow. Since the restart, many young players have been given a chance. Who would you call up? I've got Greenwood, Foden, Saka. My thing with Phil Foden, very talented young player, not getting enough game time. I haven't seen enough of some of these young players to really, give a viewpoint on it. I think Southgate has shown he's giving youth a chance at international level, and he has stated that not enough English players are playing first team football in all the leagues, and that's from Premier League down to League Two. Guys, there isn't enough on a match day playing percentage wise. This is what look at the Germans, look at the Italians, look at the Spanish, look at the French. You look at the other top leagues around Europe, not just in those countries, but across the board. And there's a higher percentage of homegrown talent playing than in the UK. So that's where the Premier League and the Championship has failed. And this is where the big money transfers and mercenary players from overseas. And I love some of the foreign players who play in England in all sports. There has to be a cap because you're harming youth development of local talent. They've done damage with these politics. Keep politics out of sport as much as possible. I understand. I'm behind the Black Lives Matter slogan and what the words mean, because I do believe at this point, because I've got friends in the Afro-Caribbean community who have suffered racist abuse. I'm all for standing and kneeling alongside them and protesting with them about police brutality and lack of equality. The political Black Lives Matter movement you have to read the manifesto. I'm not a big fan of that. Next week, it could be Asian Lives Matter. The week after, it could be White Lives Matter. It all depends on the context. But police brutality in general, we need to look at police reform and judicial reform. But that's a different video for the other channel. At this point, yes, the BLM slogan, Black Lives Matter, yes, they do. Next week, it could be Asian Lives Matter because something's happened to someone from South Asian or Oriental origin, again in a similar situation, and then again the principle applies. Next year, it could be a young white lad beaten up by police officers and killed. And then all lives matter in principle. At this point, yes, there is an issue with racial profiling. There is an issue with lack of diversity in sport. The way that sports have got involved with the murky political side of things, it has damaged the image of a lot of sports, and a lot of fans are aggravated. And it's because they're demanding, the left is demanding, the hard left is demanding this straight away, and the right have got on board with it, jumped on it. And it's a minority of both. and the mainstream feels silenced by the whole thing. And this is the damage when you get politics, especially gender or race politics involved in sport. It creates a mess. Because since I've been a kid to growing up, we've made huge progresses in participation. Football, rugby, cricket, all sports. There's still a long way to go. But forced diversity and the Barme rule and all that is not the way to do it. You have to do it from grassroots level. Go out into the local communities and talk to the local kids and talk to the local families and go, right, what do you feel needs to change with the sports teams you follow and sports at school and opportunities? This is how you do it. You don't do it by forcing it from the top down. You have to start the bottom up. And unfortunately, the sports are just knee-jerk and reaction because they're going, right, we the corporate side are gaslighting this. Professional sportsmen are gaslighting this. And that's the problem. The movement has been hijacked by big name brands, big name companies, TV, they're gaslighting it. And that damages the argument. And unfortunately, it's the whole thing's a mess. And it actually hinders change rather than helps it. Because I've seen homophobic, and I've seen racist chanting at football, and I hate it. I hate it. It's a thing. It's there. It's not going away. So the Kick It Out campaign has clearly failed. The Rainbow Laces campaign has clearly failed, and those campaigns have been going for a long time. All they've done is put a different slogan on the shirts. If the existing Kick It Out campaign is clearly failing, and then there are questions about the integrity of the organisation because Lord Ousley has been caught up in corruption scandals, it says there's a problem. The Kick It Out campaign has clearly failed over 20 years. There's always going to be that minority of idiots who ruin it for everyone else. Always. But we are seeing a rise in reported cases. That doesn't mean there's actually a rise in cases. It's people actually having the guts to report the problem. Because clearly the problem has never gone away, but people just couldn't be bothered to report it. So the actual number of idiots, the minority that are being stupid, is still the same number, just more people are reporting these idiots. So it's skewed the figures. But that's another thing. Hungarian forward, I can't pronounce his name. Not because I know some Hungarians, I know how to pronounce this, I will get it right. Blint Plajdosti. I think that's how you pronounce his name. I have no idea. I think I pronounced that completely wrong. But he classes as a Brit because he's learned his hockey in the OHA. Wow, okay, so that's getting around the import rule. Cheeky. Yeah, Central European countries like Hungary have always had a good hockey program. They just are not as good as the Slovaks and the Czechs. But it is interesting how rules are in place over overseas players and how teams are exploiting loopholes because he's played a little bit of his junior hockey over here. That is a bit cheeky. But talking about player development and homegrown talent, it doesn't matter what sport it is, these loopholes exist. They need to be shut down. He needs to be classed as an overseas player. Born overseas, he's probably played his first hockey game at junior, like AAA level in Hungary. He's played in the US as well. He might have done a bit of the OHA Swindon program, but he's a Hungarian. He has a Hungarian passport. He doesn't have a British passport. Even though he classifies as British trained, he really isn't. Let's be brutally honest. But that's a loophole in the rules. He's been signed as a British trained player when in reality he's a Hungarian. And while I love seeing the overseas players play, there is the import rule for a reason, to encourage more homegrown development. And yeah, it is what it is. Right, I've been going for over 2 hours now. We got a bit political in this live stream. A bit political. I didn't want to. I didn't want to get that political, but you can see the issues when politics. This is why I want to do a video on why politics and professional sport should not mix, because what we have seen is a PR disaster for all. I mean, the Lewis Hamilton situation in F1, he is losing a lot of fans for the sport. Yes, the English-born and raised player who's played for Wales, who's now switched to Legion, he played for Wales at under 21. You've got the You've got obviously the Rugby League World Cup next year, which I haven't even mentioned yet. Will that take place? And obviously the switching of allegiance. Welsh Rugby League has got a mess. Well, Welsh Rugby in both codes is financially in a mess. There is this the issue with the four nations, the home nations. It is an interesting one. Not gonna lie, it is an interesting one. We've seen it with the Irish and Northern Irish debate in football. And it is a dividing point. If you look at the football side of things with Ireland, Northern Ireland, that is a massive dividing point. The international selection rules in rugby league are a mess, complete and utter mess. And I have my views on it. Andrew Fifita, for example, and I think the Fifita brothers and the cousin, they can all play for Tonga and they can all play for Australia. And that is an absolute shambles because they play for both Tonga and Australia. You've got Blake Austin, he can play for Portugal, Australia, and Great Britain. He's played for all three at various age levels. He played for the GB Lions in that disastrous tour. He's also played for Portugal. Robbie Farah, who obviously is recently retired, can play for Lebanon and Australia. He's played for both. So international. Braithen Astor has played for Greece and Australia. The Minichel brothers have played for both Australia and Italy. So yes, you can clearly see where I'm getting at with rugby league selection rules. You can play for multiple countries throughout your international career at representative level. That will need to be addressed if rugby league is to be taken seriously on the international stage. Rugby union, yes, this again, the international selection rules have got to be resident for so long. Look at the French national side, how many South Africans, Fijians, are currently in the French setup because of residency. You look at England, there's a few South Sea Islanders there, New Zealand, Australia. The international selection rules in both codes of rugby are a mess. But remember Adam Januzaj, ex-Man United. He can play for Belgium. He can play for Kosovo. He can play for Albania. He can play for England. That is a mess. When a player is able to play for four countries, there's I think it's McLean, ex of Sunderland, the guy who refuses to wear the who can play for the Republic or Northern Ireland. Question marks over his selection. There's that young lad who plays for West Ham. He switched allegiance from Ireland to England, and that caused a big uproar. I mean, yeah, Shane Wayne obviously picking this Welsh lad who's played for Wales and now has wanted to switch allegiance. It does. We have to look at international selection rules. Absolutely. Shanklin used to play for Wales at rugby union. He could have played for England. He chose to play for Wales for whatever reason. One of his parents was English. One of his parents was Welsh. He chose to play for Wales. He was lost to England. Great international centre. Gareth Bale, ironically, could have played for England. Sam Warburton could have played for England. I think, yeah, Liam Stewart, yeah, he can play for a multitude of hockey teams. It's ridiculous. I mean, the Evans brothers who used to play for Scotland Rugby Union, they could have also played for England and Wales. They chose to play for Scotland. The selection rules are a mess. Plain and simple, the selection rules and eligibility rules are a mess when it comes to a lot of professional sports. Yeah, I mean, again, it's. I mean, Tyson Frizzell, who plays for St George Dragons, he's played New South Wales in Origin, played for Australia, played for Wales, rugby league player. It's ridiculous. And we have to look at. Let's not get started on Ben Stokes because I think he's an arsehole. But as a player, he's brilliant, but his off-field antics really damage his reputation. And yeah, he's still selected for England. He's still selected as part of the leadership group. There's more allegations against him about domestic violence. Oh, the Vinopola brothers. I'm not going to get any more drawn into selection rules. It is a mess. It's something that needs. Uh, we need to look at. Um, Stokes's been here since 14, but he did play. He went to school and was brought up in New Zealand for about half his life. It's complicated. He's eligible to play for New. It's like Kevin Peterson. The South Africans didn't want him because he was a disruption, so we got him, and he became a disruption. Brilliant player, absolute arsehole. But that's my personal opinion on a lot of sports stars. Brilliant on the field, arseholes off it. But I think we're getting selection rules when it comes to cricket, rugby union, rugby league, football. It's a mess, and they need to look at the loopholes. And they need to look at criteria. And they need to look at basically sorting them out. Because Diego Costa played for Spain and Brazil. 3 caps for Brazil, I think you'll find, and I think you'll have so many caps before you have to select a country. And Diego Costa played 3 times for Brazil and then switched allegiance to Spain because he got there by residency and he speaks fluent Spanish. And he then ended up getting Spanish citizenship and getting Spanish passport. Very divisive player. But no, it is complicated. The selection rules are a mess. They need to look at them. A lot of sports need to look at their selection rules. One Pelini can play for Canada in the NA because one Pelini brother plays for Great Britain at ice hockey. They're both born in Guildford. It's ridiculous. In theory, they should have played a match against each other in the warm-up to the World Championships. In theory. Obviously, we had COVID and all that, but one Pelini brother could play for Canada at the World Championship ice hockey. The other one could play for Great Britain. They're both born in Guildford, just down the road from here. Absolutely ridiculous. Both have British passports, both have Canadian passports. It's ridiculous. But there you go. I'm going to leave that there. It's been an interesting live stream. We really discussed a lot of stuff. Yeah, it's an absolute mess when it. Yeah, well, we have to sort out international selection rules. But I'm going to leave that there. Thank you very much for watching. Please place some thoughts below. I'm going to sort my dinner out. I'm going to have a quick fag, and I'm going to go to bed because I've got to be up at 4 o'clock in the morning. But thank you very much for watching. Thank you for all your questions. Really interesting live stream, and I'll have some more videos for you very, very soon.